Hi, we're here for another review. I'm down here in my basement on my children's whiteboard. And don't forget, I do take requests for different reviews, and I apologize that I just do them all first take, so if they're, not always the best quality, but I do them, and I do take requests. Most of them have been done by request. Today's review is going to be called Votes for Women, just reviewing how women get the right to vote here. And one thing to remember is it's a process that develops. It's not like no states allow women the right to vote and then suddenly all states allow women the right to vote. That's not quite true, although sometimes we think of it as that. For instance, actually New Jersey in 1776, during the American Revolution, basically says that all people who own a certain amount of land or paying in taxes can vote. In fact, African Americans vote, and some women vote as well during this time period. And it's not until 1807 when it's actually taken away. That most of the women and African Americans, free African Americans who had been voting Federalist, and so it was actually pretty easy for the Democratic Republicans to alter the New Jersey law there and say all white men who are worth a certain amount and paying in the taxes can vote. Is a political ploy, but New Jersey did allow women equal voting rights to that of men based on the conditions that they had put forth. But it obviously gets taken away a long time prior. The first states to grant full voting rights to women, meaning full in all equality from back then, still running till today, and obviously today with the laws and stuff in place, actually happened out west. Wyoming, Utah give women the right to vote in 1869, fully equal to that of men. And in fact, it was Brigham Young's, I think it was like her granddaughter, that was the first person to vote in Utah. That was a woman. A lot of people say, well, like out west, why were they the first states to allow women the right to vote in full equality to men? And one theory is that if I'm back in Boston or on the East Coast and I'm a middle class guy, my one job can feed the entire family, and I don't have to rely on my wife as much economically, and therefore I don't have to consider her an equal. But if you're living out west in very rural areas that are sparsely populated, that there's more of an incentive to view the wife as an equal, because she's just as important working alongside you, the middle class families, to put that food on the table. You need your wife working alongside you. So that's one theory. Wyoming and Utah are the first states. Wyoming's the first, but Utah's the second, but technically they have a vote before Wyoming, so technically they're the first to have a woman full equal voting rights. And other western states like Washington and Idaho are also quick to follow suit. And it's also a developing process. There were actually quite a few states out east that would give women limited or partial voting rights, not allowing them to vote in, let's say, a presidential election, but allowing them to vote in many local elections or various other elections, or vice versa. And so that's something to kind of consider here too. Now, the Seneca Falls Convention is a big convention. A lot of Quakers put it together. Lucretia Mott's the leader here, 1848. And, this is prior to the Civil War. This is prior to the big famous push. And a lot of these women are abolitionists, and they were very, very upset because they're being mistreated by a lot of abolitionist societies. For example, there's even this big abolition society convention in London, and a lot of the women go there and then told that, you can't participate fully because you're a woman. And so a lot of them realize, our rights are intertwined with this abolitionist struggle, that we can't separate the two. Lucretia Mott is like this big leader of the Seneca Falls Convention. But Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who's not a Quaker, but many of the people at the Seneca Falls Convention weren't Quakers, although it was put on by Quakers, is the primary author of this Declaration of Sentiments, although she had help from Lucretia Mott and her sister. But the Declaration of Sentiments is very, very clever. It plays off the Declaration of Independence, uses a lot of it word for word. But they point out that the Declaration of Independence might be a bit hypocritical in the fact that we're denying rights to women, including people at the Seneca Falls Convention also point out, being denied the right to vote, but other rights as well. A lot of Quakers were, in fact, early women's rights leaders. It was common that women's rights leaders during this time period were overrepresented from the Quaker community, in large part because the Quaker community preached that, God made everyone and everyone in his image, and therefore we're all equal before God. And so they were maybe a bit ahead of the times in terms of gender issues and gender equality. The 15th Amendment, a Civil War Amendment, 1870 is when it is officially ratified and takes effect. But it had taken a couple years to get to that point in the ratification process. But the 15th Amendment gives African American men the right to vote. And a lot of women were disappointed, including Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and very upset when they noticed that black men were going to get the right to vote, but women were not. White women, black women were not. And so that's why you see the American Women's Suffrage Association and the National Women's Suffrage Association formed in 1869 when they realize that the 15th Amendment is going to exclude them. They realize, slaves have been freed. The freed people, the freed men are going to get the right to vote. We are not going to get the right to vote. So they form these suffrage associations to push for the right to vote. Suffrage meaning the right to vote. And so we have Nassau here, 1890. My cat's trying to jump up on the camera there. We have Nassau. Nassau is the National American Women's Suffrage Association, which merges in 1890. The two organizations, the American Women's Suffrage Association and National Women's Suffrage Association, merge in 1890. And so the first presidents are, first president is Elizabeth Cady Stanton from Seneca Falls fame. And then Susan B. Anthony, she's a Quaker. She's very, very, very famous and inspirational leader, speaks a lot on behalf of women's rights and so forth. She famously gets arrested for voting in a state, her home state, where she's not allowed to vote. She goes to prison for it, refuses to pay the fine. Later on, some of her friends pay the fine. But Susan B. Anthony is a very inspirational leader that encourages many other women at a later date to work for women's rights and suffrage. And then the last two presidents are Carrie Chapman Catt, Anna Howard Shaw, and then Carrie Chapman Catt again. She's president, and then she's not president, and then she's president again with Anna Howard Shaw in between. And they focus more on the state by state, like get one state the right women allowing them, to have the vote, and then work on the next state. Just go state by state, and they want to focus on. Being ladylike, being proper. Remember, this is Victorian culture a lot. Like women have certain expectations of how to act, how not to act, and they want to keep in line with that. Well, while getting the right to vote, but keep in line with women being proper and ladylike and going state by state, not having public speeches, not going out, having speeches, but not like public speeches out on the sidewalk or in the park. They don't see that as proper for a lady. After women get the equal right to vote nationwide, NASA changes its name to the League of Women Voters, and they're still around today. They lobby on various issues. They encourage women to vote on various issues and inform women to vote based on various issues. And you could actually Google their webpage. They're still around today. The National Women's Party is a lot different than NASA. The National Women's Party is founded by Alice Paul. Lucy Burns is the number 2 in that. And they break off of NASA. And they break off of NASA on that fundamental disagreement on how to get women the right to vote. They don't want to go state by state. They want a national amendment giving everything all at once. And then they're also willing to be what at the time is called militants. New York Times, calls these ladies militants because they're willing to protest out on the sidewalk. They're willing to chalk up sidewalks with their message and drop pamphlets and various things and protest. And picket the White House. Alice Paul's the first person to organize a large protest in front of the White House, and she calls them the Silent Sentinels. And she's as a Quaker though, she's a pacifist and says, don't fight back, and don't even fight back with words. If somebody insults you, just stay silent. And she organizes parades. In fact, the famous parade during the inaugural time of Woodrow Wilson, when he wins that 1912 election and gets sworn into office in March of 1913. And so that's the National Women's Party. In fact, they're famous for many of them getting arrested while picketing the White House, arrested for obstructing traffic. And Alice Paul and other ladies go on this famous hunger strike, which brings them more attention and sympathy for their cause. And Alice Paul does a lot to keep women's suffrage in the front of the newspapers there. 19th Amendment is finally realized. In fact, only 2 states on this side, on the east side of the Mississippi, had allowed full equal voting rights between men and women prior to the full ratification of the amendment. Now, many of those states on this side of the Mississippi allowed women partial voting rights, but only 2 allowed full voting rights. The first was New York, and the second was Michigan. And so 1920, the 19th voting amendment, 19th Amendment to the Constitution says women have full equal voting rights equal to that of men, period, nationwide. And so that settles the question as far as voting rights. However, Alice Paul then goes on to write the Equal Rights Amendment Act, saying that women still aren't going to be fully equal, and that we need equality in the law. And she writes this and presents it for the first time in 1923. She calls it, at first she calls it the Lucretia Mott Amendment, in honor of Lucretia Mott and the Seneca Falls Convention. And she works on this, and Alice Paul gets this before every session of Congress, basically for the rest of her life, up until 1974, when she suffers a stroke and becomes paralyzed. She dies in 1977, just a few years after that stroke. But the Equal Rights Amendment was never ratified. It came very, very close to being ratified. In fact, our state of Michigan did ratify it, but you didn't have the 3/4 of states ratifying it to actually make it an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. But some people are still trying to work on that today, and as from the 1960s and 1970s, it was a very tenuous issue with looking at people for it, people against it because, well, maybe women will get drafted, people for it because of pay, and in various ways women are discriminated in the workplace and in government and various other ways. Even some men for it, saying that there are some ways that men are disadvantaged, like in divorce with child rights and things like that. But here's just a brief summary of women gaining the right to vote in America. I hope you learned from it. Thank you.